The ballroom shimmered with chandeliers, laughter rising over the music. Michael Carter, a tired single father in worn work boots, was just there to finish a job. But when a powerful woman crossed the floor and stopped in front of him, desperation in her eyes, he realized the night would ask more of him than he ever imagined, and nothing in his life would remain the same. Before we dive in, drop a comment with where you're watching from, and don't forget to subscribe for more stories like this. Let's begin. Michael Carter was used to being invisible. On construction sites, in grocery lines, even at Sophie's parent-teacher conferences, people rarely looked past his calloused hands and work boots. That night, hauling scaffolding across the grand ballroom of the Haviland Hotel, he expected no different. The room glittered with chandeliers that belonged in movies, not in the life of a widowed father who counted every dollar. But then, she noticed him. Victoria Blake, her face was on billboards, in business magazines, the kind of woman who never stood still long enough for a man like Michael to exist. Yet she moved straight toward him, heels striking the marble, eyes sharp but desperate. "Don't take this the wrong way," she said in a rush, "but I need you. Right now." Michael blinked, thinking she'd mistaken him for staff. Technically, she had. But then her assistant shoved a velvet ring box into his hand. "My board members are arriving, and my father will be here any minute," Victoria continued, lowering her voice. "They can't see me alone. Not tonight. Pretend you're my husband." Michael laughed, actually laughed. But when her hand brushed his, he felt the faint tremor in her fingers. This wasn't a game. She was terrified. He almost said no, until she whispered something that froze him. "If you walk away, I lose everything I've built." And just like that, Michael saw a reflection of his own fear, the kind that kept him awake at night, wondering if he was enough for Sophie. Against every bit of logic, he slid the ring onto his finger. "Fine," he muttered, heart hammering. "But I'm not good at lies." Victoria's lips curved into something between a smile and a plea. "Neither am I. That's why I chose you." They didn't have time to rehearse. A stylist rushed past, fastening a cufflink on Michael's sleeve, while Victoria whispered details in his ear like a coach calling plays. Her father's name was Charles. They'd met 3 years ago. No kids. His heart skipped at that part, better to leave Sophie out of the script. "Smile when I touch your arm," she murmured. "Laugh like I've just said something clever." Michael nearly choked. "What if you haven't?" Her eyes flickered, the faintest grin betraying her nerves. "Then fake it." Inside the ballroom, cameras flashed. The board members were already there, wine glasses glinting. Victoria slid her hand into Michael's, and the whole room seemed to pause, like even the chandeliers were leaning down to listen. Michael stood straighter, channeling the only thing he knew, how to work until the job was done. And for tonight, the job was pretending he belonged. The first test came quick. A director with silver hair and an ice-cold gaze leaned in. "So, Michael, what is it you do?" Michael's stomach tightened. He could lie, say finance, law, something polished. Instead, words slipped out before he could stop them: construction. Mostly high-rises. The kind people like you work in. The man smirked, clearly amused at the blunt honesty. Victoria squeezed Michael's arm, as if warning him to tread carefully. But then, something unexpected happened. A woman across the table, a younger board member, actually leaned forward, her eyes warming. "Finally," she said, almost under her breath. "Someone real in this room." Victoria shot her a look, half shocked, half curious. Michael hadn't just survived the first question, he'd accidentally won an ally. The dinner plates hadn't even been cleared before Michael felt the weight of Victoria's father's stare. Charles Blake was the kind of man who didn't blink often, and when he finally spoke, the table seemed to fall silent around him. "So, you're the husband I've never met," Charles said smoothly, lifting his glass. Funny how Victoria keeps her secrets. Michael swallowed, the tuxedo collar suddenly too tight. He wanted to say something polite, but before he could, Victoria jumped in. We prefer our privacy, Father. Her voice was calm, but Michael felt the slight tremor in her hand under the table. It reminded him of Sophie before her first day of school, brave on the outside, breaking inside. The conversation turned to business, quarterly losses, upcoming deals, politics Michael didn't pretend to understand. He kept quiet until a joke about real work floated across the table. Something about only men who build empires matter. Michael surprised himself. I build things too, he said evenly. They might not make headlines, but without men like me, your towers don't stand. The room froze for half a beat. Then, to his shock, one of the older board members actually chuckled. Well said, the man muttered. Victoria's eyes darted toward him, wide, startled, almost grateful. But Charles leaned back, lips curling into a smile that wasn't a smile at all. Interesting, he said slowly. You'll have to tell me more about your empire of scaffolds. The words dripped like a challenge. Michael had just made his first enemy in the Blake family. The gala wound down, but Michael's shift wasn't over. Charles Blake cornered him near the coat check, away from the noise of violins and laughter. The older man's presence was like cold steel, measured, intimidating. So tell me, Michael, Charles said, folding his hands behind his back. Where exactly did you and my daughter meet? Spare me the fairy tale. Michael's mind blanked. He had rehearsed nothing past dinner. Before he could stumble, Victoria appeared, slipping her arm through his. We met where people least expected, she said smoothly. And that's all you need to know. Charles didn't even glance at her. His eyes stayed locked on Michael, unblinking. Men who lie for women rarely last. I'll know the truth soon enough. They left in silence, Victoria's heels tapping quick against the marble. Outside, the night air felt like freedom, but Michael couldn't shake Charles's words. At the curb, Victoria stopped, folding her arms. For the first time, her polished armor cracked. You handled him better than I expected. Michael shrugged. I just told the truth. She looked at him strangely, as if the concept itself was foreign. Then, before he could ask, a black town car pulled up. She opened the door, but instead of getting in, she turned to him. Do me one more favor, she said quietly. Don't tell anyone about Sophie. Michael froze. How do you? I saw the drawing in your wallet, she interrupted, her voice softer now. She looks like you. Michael's hand instinctively pressed against his chest pocket. He hadn't shown that picture to anyone outside of family. Victoria's eyes held his for a beat longer than necessary. Secrets have weight. And in my world, they can crush you. Michael told himself he'd keep Sophie out of it. One night of pretending was dangerous enough, she didn't need to be anywhere near Victoria Blake's world. But fate had other plans. The following Saturday, Victoria's sleek black car pulled up outside the modest brick apartment Michael called home. He nearly dropped the grocery bag in his arms when Sophie opened the door before he could stop her. Daddy? She asked, clutching her stuffed rabbit. Who's the lady in the fancy coat? Victoria smiled, a small, cautious smile, nothing like the rehearsed ones she wore at the gala. She knelt down, heels sinking slightly into the cracked pavement. Hi, Sophie. I'm a friend of your dad's. Michael felt his throat tighten. He waited for Sophie to retreat, shy as usual. Instead, she studied Victoria with those wide, curious eyes and asked, Do you like peanut butter sandwiches? Victoria blinked, clearly caught off guard. She makes everyone eat them, Michael muttered, setting the bag down. To his shock, Victoria laughed, a real laugh, unpolished and sudden. It was the first time Michael had heard it. Sophie grinned. Then you can come in. Michael started to object, but it was too late. Sophie tugged Victoria inside. Minutes later, the woman who had commanded a boardroom was perched at a chipped kitchen table, carefully cutting the crusts off a peanut butter sandwich. For a fleeting moment, Michael saw something change in her eyes. Not the CEO, not the woman under pressure. Just a lonely daughter eating in a stranger's kitchen. But outside, across the street, Michael didn't notice a dark sedan idling, engine running. Someone was watching, camera lens pointed straight at the window. By Monday morning, Victoria's phone was buzzing non-stop. She ignored half the calls, silenced the rest. But one text froze her: "Who's the man and child? Board deserves to know." Attached was a blurry photo of her sitting at Michael's kitchen table, Sophie's stuffed rabbit propped on the chair beside her. She slammed the phone down, her pulse hammering. Somehow, someone had followed her. And now, the secret was leverage. Meanwhile, Michael was back on a worksite, balancing on scaffolding 3 stories up, when Victoria appeared below in a tailored coat that didn't belong anywhere near cement dust. Workers whistled and elbowed one another, but her face was all business. "We need to talk," she called. Minutes later, in the shadow of the half-built tower, she showed him the photo. Michael's stomach dropped. "They followed you?" "They followed us," she corrected sharply. "My father will see this, and the board will twist it into something it's not." Michael's first instinct was anger. Not for himself, he was used to being judged, but for Sophie. His daughter's smile, caught in a stranger's camera, now dangled as a weapon in a world she didn't belong to. "Pull me into your world again, fine," he said, voice low. "But leave Sophie out of it." Victoria's eyes softened, almost guilty. "I thought I could control this. I can't." "But maybe together," she hesitated, then met his gaze. "We can turn it to our advantage." Before Michael could respond, his phone buzzed. A message from Sophie's school. He frowned at the screen: "Emergency, please come immediately." Michael drove faster than he ever had, heart pounding with every red light. By the time he reached the school, Sophie was sitting in the principal's office, legs swinging nervously off the chair. "Daddy," she cried, running into his arms. Her teacher lingered by the door, face pale. "We had an incident," the principal explained. "Some parents saw a photo online, your daughter with a woman they recognized." The children repeated what they heard at home. Sophie was teased. Michael's jaw clenched. He knelt, brushing Sophie's hair back. "What did they say, Peanut?" Her lip trembled. "They said Miss Blake isn't really your friend. They said you're lying." "That I'm lying too." Michael's chest burned. His daughter, 6 years old, accused of dishonesty for something she didn't even understand. Then came the real blow. The principal cleared his throat. "Mr. Carter, this situation is complicated. Given who Ms. Blake is, the school board is concerned about media attention. Perhaps you should consider keeping Sophie at home until this settles." Michael stared at him in disbelief. "So because someone took a picture, my daughter doesn't deserve school?" The man avoided his gaze. "We're trying to protect the other children." Michael wanted to shout, but Sophie's small hand tightened around his. He swallowed the anger. When they stepped outside, a black SUV was waiting. The window rolled down. Victoria. She looked stricken at the sight of Sophie's red eyes. "This is exactly what I was afraid of," Michael said bitterly. But Victoria shook her head, voice steady for once. "No. This is what I've been running from my whole life. And maybe it's time we stop running." 2 nights later, Victoria walked into her company's boardroom with Michael and Sophie waiting just outside in the hallway. Michael hated it, dragging Sophie into skyscrapers where suits whispered behind glass, but Victoria insisted. Inside, the board buzzed with tension. Charles Blake sat at the head, cold eyes fixed on his daughter. "You've embarrassed this company," he declared, tossing the photo onto the polished table. "Parading around with a construction worker and his child? Do you realize what the shareholders are saying?" Victoria stood tall. "Yes. They're saying I'm human. And they're right." Gasps fluttered around the table. She pressed on. "I've worked twice as hard as any man here. I've delivered results you can't deny. Yet the only thing you question is my personal life. That ends tonight." Her father's voice sharpened. "This man is beneath you." Michael, listening from the hallway, stiffened, but then heard Victoria reply, clear and unwavering, "He's the only one in this building who tells me the truth." Silence. Heavy, dangerous silence. Then one of the board members, the younger woman who had smiled at Michael during the gala, spoke. "She's right. We've demanded she prove herself in ways we never asked of you, Charles." Murmurs spread. For the first time, cracks appeared in the father's armor. But as Victoria left the room, her confidence faltered. Out in the hallway, Michael saw her hand tremble again. "Did I just win them over," she whispered, "or sign my own resignation?" Before Michael could answer, Sophie slipped her tiny hand into Victoria's. "You didn't lose," she said softly. "You told the truth." And for Victoria Blake, that was scarier, and more freeing, than any boardroom battle. For a brief moment, Michael thought things might calm down. Victoria still had her position, Sophie had gone back to school, and the photo scandal was fading from the headlines. But Charles Blake was not a man who let battles go unanswered. One evening, as Michael arrived home with Sophie's school project tucked under his arm, he found an envelope taped to his apartment door. Inside was a letter, formal, legal, suffocating with heavy words, "Custody Review Petition." Michael's blood ran cold. His late wife's distant relatives, people who hadn't called in years, were suddenly questioning his fitness as a parent. And attached, stapled neatly, were clippings, grainy shots of Sophie in Victoria's car, blurry photos of Michael standing awkwardly in a tuxedo at the gala. The message was clear. Charles had dug into every weakness he could find, and now he was threatening the one thing Michael couldn't afford to lose, Sophie. Michael sat heavily at the kitchen table, Sophie asleep in the next room, her drawing of their family taped proudly to the fridge. He pressed his head into his hands. When Victoria arrived unannounced later that night, she found him staring at the letter. He didn't look up. "This is my life, Victoria. You can lose a board seat and build another company. But if I lose Sophie, I've got nothing left." For once, Victoria didn't argue. She quietly pulled out a chair, sat across from him, and whispered, "Then we fight this together. He came after you because of me. And I won't let him win." Michael finally looked at her, really looked, and for the first time, believed she meant it. The courtroom was colder than Michael expected. He sat at the worn wooden table, every muscle tight, Sophie's hand curled around his. Across the aisle, Charles Blake sat with his lawyers, calm as stone. He hadn't come to argue custody himself, he'd come to watch Michael squirm. But then the doors opened, and Victoria walked in. She wasn't required to be there. She wasn't family. Yet she strode straight to Michael's side, slipping a folder onto the table. Inside were affidavits, statements from Sophie's teachers, neighbors, even Michael's foreman, all testifying to his devotion as a father. When the judge asked if anyone wished to speak, Victoria rose. Her voice was steady, stripped of the corporate polish. "Michael Carter is the most honest man I've ever met. If you question his worth, then question mine too, because I stand with him." For the first time, Michael saw her father falter, just slightly, but enough. The judge read through the evidence, then delivered a ruling that made Michael's knees go weak. Custody remained his, undisputed. Outside the courthouse, Sophie tugged Victoria's sleeve. "Does this mean you're staying with us now?" Victoria knelt, meeting her wide eyes. Only if your dad says so. Michael looked at them both, the noise of the city rushing around them. Months ago, he'd been invisible, a construction worker lost in the crowd. Now, against every odd, these two faces had become his world. He reached for Victoria's hand. "You once asked me to pretend to be your husband," he said quietly. "How about we stop pretending?" Victoria smiled, unrehearsed, unafraid. And with Sophie's laughter echoing between skyscrapers, Michael felt, for the first time in years, like the future was theirs to build. Thanks for watching, like and subscribe for more stories that stay with you.